Well, welcome, John. It's really good to see you. And the first thing to say is that although you've been in the business a very long time, this new album,
In the business. That's
yeah,
might be a stretch. I mean, sort of floating around the edge of the business most of the time.
yeah, well, but this new album, where it really starts, it's just a really wonderful record. And I don't know if you have that sense about it that this is something special that you've made. It has edges for me in a mainstream way. I kind of think of the beautiful South. I don't know whether you're offended or pleased by that comparison, but
No,
also,
no, if it's
uh,
something you like, I'm happy.
yeah, well, no, but also thinking of the brilliant album last year by Robert Lloyd and Janet Beveridge Bean as well.
Well, that you know what I had a song on that album, and that Robert and Janet did, which was lovely. I was very flattered, and that was around the time that I was starting the Bright Shiners, and the fact they were working in such a seemed like they went to Valencia and made the album there. Then the Mekons went to Valencia to the same studio after that, and that again was around the time we were starting the Bright China stuff. And I don't know, I just felt for me that I needed to do something that sounded very, very different and collaborate with different people. And it was working with Alice Spencer and Tammany Garami, who both live in Austin, violin player, and then Alice is a singer and plays the mellotron. And John Szymanski, who'd done the Four Lost Souls with me. It was just a really nice, interesting combination where people were bringing a lot to the table, and I could relinquish a lot of my kind of like preciousness or desire for it to be a certain way. I just kind of had sketches of ideas in my head, and I kept it really minimal, and then would just let people run with it. That was my production technique, was to roll over and let other people do all the work, which is worked swimmingly well on this occasion.
It's a really lovely kind of spare album, isn't it? It's the songs are stripped back and it just lets your voice and the words come through.
The interesting thing for me was that, like I said, I had these sketches, but also Alice Spencer was singing with a band called the Shiny Ribs, which was more kind of like a soul funk type band. But then I heard some of her solo stuff, and she told us, she told me and John that she was buying a mellotron, and we were just like, we have to have a band. And then I heard some of her solo stuff. She sent me a video where she was recording in a studio called the Wonder Chamber in Austin with a guy called Brian Beattie. And Brian Beattie was in the band called Glass Eye, who actually opened for the Mekons at their very first Texas gig. And then we had this strangely depressing parallel career where we were both ripped off by the same record company in the late 80s, early 90s. After we'd been on A&M, our manager got us signed to this thing that didn't really exist, and we were dangling away with promises for ages. And Steve Albini who was friends, I became friends with, was working with Glass Eye, and they were in exactly the same position. I think Albini worked it out that the whole thing was a total scam. But at some point, the Mekons were putting out a record on We Are Latina, which we never got paid for. And we ended up sat in a bar waiting for some money in the middle of the LA riots. And that was kind of the end of the end of the Mekons flirtation with the music business. And we ended up on Touch and Go. But Brian has this studio, and I saw this video. I go, where is that? Whose place is that? This sounds amazing. And he is a really eccentric and interesting recording engineer. And nothing was normal, to work somewhere where the normal things that I'm used to, which I'll probably fall back on, and just like started an album by getting a good drum sound. We didn't put any drums on this. Anything that sounds like a drum was put on afterwards. And some of the songs we got so kind of confident with the way we played with the minimalism of being really minimal and being repetitive and being austere. There's some of the songs were just recorded directly live, so those are my favorite bits on the record, the bits where it was a journey, but we actually found by the last couple of recording sessions that we could just, oh, we have a sound. This is what we sound like, and we've invented this, and it doesn't sound like anything else. So that's all I want, really.
Yeah, well, I'll embed a couple of the tracks onto the Substack, and people can hear those if they're reading bits of this interview as well and listening to it. But
everybody in the band sings as well. That's which was nice for me, because when I don't feel like it's a solo album, although we put Jon Langford and the Bright Shiners, it's really the Bright Shiners. But I think when we did the Men of Gwent, and we called it the Men of Gwent, the record company were like, if we put Jon Langford the Men of Gwent, we'd have sold like 35 more copies. But with this one, I said it's got to be Jon Langford and the Bright Shiners, but it's not. It's a band, and I'm the lead vocals are everything. So nearly all are duets if you listen to it. And Alice is a very interesting harmony singer, and she kind of gets in places, that you wouldn't normally put a harmony. So it's kind of like she's singing lower than me in places, and it's got a real kind of different feel to it that I can't explain, and I have no ability to recreate, because I'm fairly simple in what I do. But if you surround yourself with people who are more talented than you, it helps, I think.
Yeah. Just a couple of standout tracks for me: Discarded and Sea Houses. I don't know what you regard as the standout tracks. There's so much good music.
I would think that, well, actually, that you picked on the two where I think Alice had the massive influence, and Sea Houses was just a sketch, and it didn't have the whole instrumental section. And I just recorded it on my phone and sent it to her, and then it came back, and she'd gone to some mate's studio and cut up the chords that I played and made them into this other thing, and then suddenly it came back sounding like an epic soundtrack to a documentary about underwater creatures or something. I don't know. It's just that was the kind of turning point. That's one of the first things we did. And I was like, what did you just do? And I couldn't even understand it when she sent it back. It just sounded orchestral. It really played to the strengths of the mellotron, which was just the sound. I'm fascinated with that sound, but somebody has to play it. If somebody's playing it in a kind of strangely informed way, it really works. And then Discarded, that was the one. I mean, Alice finished that one off because there was a couple of tracks to make. I think both of those she finished off, actually, but she added. She got a load of brass players from Austin, Texas, to come in and make a Salvation Army band on Discarded, which was a song about I was trying to compare a sort of a breakup with the closure of British Steel in Newport in 1976. So an industrial relations breakup song.
Well, the politics is, I guess, never entirely separate from your work. And you've mentioned the Mekons already. Before we chatted, I was listening to Never Been in a Riot and Where Were You? In some ways, musically, a million miles from where you are now. But in another way, with the directness and with the spareness, there is a direct thread to where you are now.
That's the word I always use, actually, because it's just back to, I wasn't going to be in a band, I was meant to be a painter, and I went to art school in Leeds in 1976, and I was going to be, I thought I was going to be like Van Gogh or someone painting pictures, then see what happened after I left college. But college, it was just such a volatile time. Pistols and the Clash turned up in Leeds and played on that tour, and everybody threw away their paintbrushes and said, let's start bands. So the Gang of Four were our mates, and they were like a real band, and we just used to sneak into their rehearsal room and practice. But we had it was about the politics, and it was like art students, so it was about that aesthetic and austerity, and that, I think, really works for me. I was talking, somebody said the other day, like Mark E. Smith said, it's not repetition, it's discipline. And I was like, and then the Gang of Four used to not have solos, but they would drop out, and you would hear the the parts of the song. So each person would be playing a part, and then you'd feature it by dropping out, which is a dub reggae take. So you'd suddenly just be listening to the drums or just the guitar on its own and things like that. And that, I mean, for me, that's the thread that's always been there. And the engagement in politics, that's why we loved country music with the Mekons so much in the 80s. When we made Fear and Whiskey, we just started hearing these songs that spoke directly about real life. Most people thought country music was schlock and boring old people music. We got totally sucked up into kind of Hank Williams, Jimmy Rogers, and that the classic honky tonk stuff. Really spoke directly to a community, which we thought punk was trying to do. But in a lot of ways, punk was kind of escapist music in the first place, with all that yelling about anarchy and smashing the system and stuff like that. We were always trying to write politically with a small p about our lives. And if a song, for me, one thing I've learned is if a song can do anything, I don't know, that doesn't necessarily bring down a government or change anyone's minds, but it can start a conversation where there's a bit of common ground can be achieved. So
yeah, I think it's fair to say that I do love a bit of yelling, I have to say, on my music, and a little bit of a racket, but there is, I think.
Oh no, I like that as well.
Yeah. but I mean, the folk and the sounds on this release are obviously much more universal, aren't they? And it's music that can just reach out and touch a lot more people.
Well, that's all you can do, really. I think. I like the idea of the whole history of song going back, years and years and years, thousands of years. Every culture has songs for some reason, and then to have that be something that connects people, maybe even burrowing on the fringes of the music industry, like the Mekons and the Bright Shiners do. It's if something strikes a chord with someone, that's a win as far as I'm concerned.
Beautiful. So I just want to check before I let you go, Jon, because other than recommending the album and encouraging people to listen to some of the links that I'll put up alongside this conversation, is it true that you got kicked out of the Sisters of Mercy for not wearing black?
No, I did wear black. I only played one gig with the Sisters of Mercy, but they were on we had a little record label called CNT, which put out Mekons, Three Johns, Redskins, Newtown Neurotics, and the Sisters, I think, were the second release or something on that. But I was with them mixing that single, and then Craig, the bass player, was my mate. He buggered off for 3 months doing. He was working as a photographer's assistant in the Canary Isles. So they said, "Oh, well, you better play bass then." So I was friends with Andy. I sold Andy his first drum kit.
Andrew Eldridge, as he was known. Yeah. Andy Taylor to you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was mates when I took the first publicity photographs of them as well. But they just lived up the road from me. I used to watch Doctor Who on a black and white TV on video with Andy. We used to go to late night movies at the Hyde Park together. Escape from New York, I remember. But no, I just sort of filled in, and they were my mates. And Andy was always the guy that he would buy a new drum machine once he'd abandoned drumming, which I did as well. I would buy the same drum machine he got, and he'd show me how to work it. And then he'd get the next one, and he'd tell me the guy who could customize it so he could get separate outputs. And so no, I only did one gig with him, and it really shocked me because it was at York University, and it was packed. There was about 400 people there, and they had a smoke machine, no amplifiers. So there was and the drum machine was an original Dr. Rhythm, where Andy had like a piece of masking tape with all these lines drawn on it, where the thing had to point for the tempos, and he had to, in between every song, he had to kind of tweak it like a millimeter to the left, or even smaller amount to the right, just to get the correct tempo for the songs. But it was a fantastic experience. I rehearsed with them when they were writing a lot of stuff. I rehearsed with them for those couple of months, just to they were just mates. It was really, I mean, I've dined out on being in the Sisters of Mercy. So people don't never heard of the Mekons. I say, well, I was in the Sisters of Mercy.
I just wish that story had been true, but sadly not. Anyway, listen, it's great to speak to you. I'll put a list of your gigs on the Substack as well. I know you're playing the Rock and Roll Brew House.
You know, it's the Bright Shiners are coming. John Szymanski, Alice Spencer, and Tammany Garami. John's been before, and Tammany played with the Mekons once. Alice has never played in Britain, but it's going to be an adventure, I think.
Going to be great. I hope to see you at the Birmingham gig, as I say, at the Rock and Roll Brew House, and people can look on the Substack and see all the other UK dates as well. Really appreciate your time, and I do recommend the album as well, Where It Really Starts. Good on you. Take care, man.
See you later.